everybody. We're back, baby. A little bit of a break, but we're back. Got so much to talk about. It's like you take a little bit of a break, and then all of a sudden, all hell decides to break loose. So I guess the moral of the story is no more breaks or something like that. But we got a lot to talk about. We got a lot to catch up on. First of all, I just want to say, if you haven't listened to the episodes that we did kind of pre-canned, the conversation that we had with Carla Peck in particular, back to school's coming. It's worth a listen. You should go back and either watch it or listen to it because it's just the right thing to do. Not saying, just saying. But we got to get into all of the events of the last week and maybe a little bit of change, maybe a little bit of catch up. We'll see what we see. We'll go from there. But we got a lot to talk about. We got to start right out of the gates. We're gonna start with some nice, compact, some shorter things to talk about. And the first one that we're going to talk about has to do with some concerns that have been raised by the fire chiefs across the province of Alberta. We're talking about Bill 5. Bill 5 was a bill that was going to be a UCP thing they were going to do. They were going to make some changes to the rules of the road when there's emergency vehicles. One of the big changes that they introduced, that they talked about, that they promised, was they were going to say, hey, you know what? Right now, the rules are if you pass an emergency vehicle on the side of the road and you're going in the same direction of travel, you got to drop down to 60. Currently, the rule is you got to drop down to 60 in the lane that's beside the emergency vehicle, which is good in a sense, because it does something to protect the emergency workers, whether we're talking about firefighters or paramedics or tow truck drivers, whatever the case may be, police. When we're talking about all those different occupations, having people slow down to 60 makes a big difference, not only in people's reaction time, but in the overall safety of the situation. So this was something that's been in place for a while now. Now, what Bill 5 said it was going to do is it was going to expand the rules to include all lanes going in the same direction of travel. So if you're going up a 3-lane highway, for example, like the Deerfoot, because it's 3-4 lanes in some sections, or Métis Trail in Calgary. If you're going up and there's an ambulance or a fire truck or a police car or a tow truck and they're on the side of the road doing their thing, all of the lanes have to slow down. Now, some people said, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it's the lane beside that emergency vehicle that one would think is the most important. And for the direct threat to that emergency vehicle safety, you'd be right. But what happens is everybody goes, that's the slow lane. And they try to jump into the fast lane that's left over for them. And that causes a bunch of accidents, which in turn turns into a whole bunch of other safety hazards, not only for those first responders, but also for the people in those vehicles. So the fire chiefs were very, very clear. They loved the idea of making it all of the lanes in the same direction of travel. Absolutely should go. But what happened this week? Well, the UCP decided to announce, you know what? Maybe we're not going to do that. Maybe we're gonna scale back on that. And the fire chiefs were not very happy with it. They're pretty clear. And again, one of the things that's most concerning to the fire chiefs is, wait for it, it's the UCP brand, lack of consultation. From the release from the Alberta Fire Chiefs Association, what is particularly concerning is the lack of consultation with the Alberta Fire Chiefs Association regarding these amendments. The AFCA, as the unified voice of fire chiefs throughout the province, has a deep-rooted commitment to promoting effective communication, collaboration, and best practices within the fire and emergency response community. The absence of consultation undermines the vital role that the FCA plays in ensuring the safety of our communities and the efficacy of emergency response operations. So it's yet, again, another example where there's experts who would love to be able to weigh in. They'd love to be able to say, hey, if you're thinking about making these changes, here's maybe what you could not change. Here's maybe what you could. Rather than going down that road, the UCP just decides they're going to do what they're going to do. And the consequences, I guess, be damned. Moving on from there and continuing through our lighter fare, we got some drama in the Wild Rose. Paul Hinman is suing the Wild Rose Independence Party for, it breaks down to $1 million. So he's suing for $750,000, claiming that he was improperly fired from his role as leader after the Fort McMurray-Lac-La Biche by-election. But he's also including an extra $250,000 in there for his buddy Danny Hozak because he was part of the thing. So basically what this boils down to is there was an interview that was done. This is what the lawsuit is over anyways. There was an interview that was done after the by-election in Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche, where the president of the party said, yeah, third place, not too happy about that. It kind of seems like Paul was talking about some things, and I'm paraphrasing a lot here to be clear. Kind of seems like Paul was talking about some things that weren't really relevant to the constituents. He wasn't really connecting with people. He had his own axe to grind. It's not great. We're going to do a review. Now, what that review found was a couple of different things. First of all, it found maybe he wasn't so much doing a great job in the role of leader, but the review also accused Hinman of paying himself with party money during the by-election without allegedly board approval. So after the review was done, they decided, hey, you know what, we're gonna fire Mr. Hinman. The board made the decision to remove Mr. Hinman from the role of leader. But this is where, and I don't know if it's the name Wild Rose. I don't know if that's what it is. It's something. Something's going on. Because after that happened, there was an impromptu, apparently, AGM, or annual general meeting for the Wild Rose Independence Party of Alberta, where they decided to say, hey, you know what, we're gonna change the rules a little bit here. And apparently there were enough people present at the AGM to try to force not only Paul Hinman to be reinstated as leader, but for the entire board that fired him to get fired themselves. It gets a little confusing. Now, where it gets even more wild is that the Board of Governors, they said that was an invalid thing that you did there. And it turned into a whole legal thing. A Court of Queen's Bench justice ruled on October 21st of last year that Hinman, when they removed him, they'd actually done it right. It had been legal. They said that Hinman's supporters disrupted the AGM, and they're also suing him for money too. Now, all of this gets to be really quite interesting because we've got Paul Hinman, who's no stranger to politics. He was the leader to the Wild Rose Party when it was the Wild Rose Party before Danielle Smith was the leader of the Wild Rose. So he just really likes the name Wild Rose, apparently, because since then, he formed the Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition with the same guy who is also named as being somebody who should be getting $250,000 when this lawsuit is over. So that's what's going on with the Wild Roses. I don't know. Oh, we totally missed the War of the Roses joke there that we should have hit. I apologize to our entire audience. We failed you there. I'm very sorry. Moving on from there, another little bit of news from the far right, some might say. President, there's all kinds of words we could use. John Carpe. So he's got a couple things going on in Manitoba. All stems from an incident where Mr. Carpe, I don't know if I have to say allegedly here, and you'll see why in a second. I'm going to say it anyways, just because everybody in this whole equation just sues everybody. But allegedly, Mr. Carpe hired a private investigator to follow a judge. That he hired the private investigator allegedly to find evidence that the judge wasn't following health restrictions himself, to use that in a case that the JCCF, with Mr. Carpe was the president of at the time, and then briefly wasn't, and then was again. He hired to try to get dirt on the judge is the short version. Now, this is unbelievably illegal. Not only is it a huge breach of the code of ethics for just about every law association that there is, but it's also criminal. And as anybody who's paying attention to the Alberta Politics scenes heard, right after New Year's Day, Mr. Carpe was arrested on criminal charges for this incident. So there's the first piece. There's the criminal charges against John Carpe and the other guy for paying a private investigator to follow a judge to try to influence the outcome of the case that the judge was overseeing. Also, though, there was a Law Society in Manitoba complaint about Mr. Carpe and the fact that he did this, and this was wildly unprofessional um, behavior. So I'm gonna read from the story here. Both Carpe and Cameron agreed to the Law Society's recommendations. Carpe pleaded guilty to breach of integrity, while Cameron admitted to professional misconduct. Carpe told the panel he regretted his actions. And this is a quote. I fully acknowledge that my instructing surveillance of Chief Justice Glenn Joyal was in violation of my professional obligations as a lawyer to the court and to society. So it sounds like, and I'm no legal scholar, but that sounds like a pretty clear admission of guilt to the Law Society. Now, this kind of flies in the face of the big news release that came at the beginning of January into December, where he said that he was completely innocent of all charges and denies any criminal wrongdoing, which is fascinating because he told the Law Society, yes, I shouldn't have hired the judge, or sorry, I shouldn't have hired the private investigator to follow the judge. That was a bad thing for me to do. But he's got this criminal case coming up where he's saying, I didn't do that. It seems. I don't know. It's always very confusing with Mr. Carpe, it seems. He still has those criminal charges. There's still a court date for all of that. But here's where it gets relevant and interesting for Alberta, because we checked this afternoon, and sure enough, John Carpe remains a lawyer in the province of Alberta. He remains eligible to practice in the province of Alberta. And when you take a look at the Law Society's Code of Conduct, this is where things start to get a little bit interesting, because it says quite clearly, a member of the Law Society remains subject to this code no matter where the member practices law. If a lawyer becomes a member of the bar of another jurisdiction in addition to that of Alberta, and there's inconsistency or conflict between the rules of conduct, the two jurisdictions in a given instance, the rules in the jurisdiction in which the lawyer is practicing in that matter will normally prevail. However, the Law Society continues to have jurisdiction over the lawyer. Disciplinary proceedings by another governing body may form the basis for proceedings in Alberta. So let's just be super clear. John Carpe admitted to the Manitoba Law Society that he instructed surveillance of Chief Justice Joyal, and it was in violation of the professional obligations as a lawyer to the court and to society. That's part of this whole proceeding. That's out there. That's in the ether. Because of that, he lost his ability to practice law in the province of Manitoba. Going to be fascinating to see what happens next, because not only does he have his pending criminal pieces, but he also conceivably could be facing similar proceedings from the Law Society here in Alberta. And he's got statements on record where he pleaded guilty to breach of integrity. He states on record that he did instruct surveillance of the justice of the case that the JCCF was hearing. So one would think it would be a pretty slam dunk for the Law Society of Alberta. We'll, of course, be following that as closely as we can, because it promises to be a spicy little meatball. Also worth remembering, I'm just going to throw this in here for fun, the JCCF, which John Carpe is currently the president of. He took a little hiatus after this all broke loose, but then he got brought back in right away. The JCCF, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, is the same organization that Danielle Smith donated $60,000 to $90,000, depending on whose version of events you go with, $1,000 after she crowdfunded it to sue the federal government to make vaccines more available. And then the federal government made them more available anyways, which is what they were always going to do. So it was a weird little thing. Now, we've asked multiple times, hey, Danielle, did you get a tax receipt for that? Because the JCCF is a registered charity. They issue tax receipts for donations. So did Danielle Smith manage to pivot $60,000 to $90,000 of crowdfunded money into a charitable donation slip to ensure that she doesn't pay taxes for the next, I don't know, few years at the very least? Still haven't gotten an answer. But it's fun how all of these characters, they overlap a little bit here and there. Moving on from there, though. We're gonna talk a little bit about somebody very close to Danielle Smith, and we're gonna go back a little bit because we're talking now about Marshall Smith, no relation. Okay, got to be really, really clear about that. Marshall Smith is the chief of staff to Danielle Smith. And by many accounts, he's the architect of the Alberta strategy, Alberta model, call it what you will, for drug treatment, for addictions treatment in the province of Alberta. He has some lived experience. Don't want to take anything away from that, but he has some lived experience with addictions. He was a Liberal aide in BC for a few years until he had a drug problem that got out of control. He ended up being homeless for a little bit. He did go into recovery. And this is where it gets complicated because after recovery, his former boss, BC Cabinet Minister Lorne Maincourt, set up they were trying a new model, which is almost a cut and paste version of what Alberta's currently in the process of setting up. So do with that what you will. But this new model was called Baldy Hughes. And this was a facility that was set up to be this new model for recovery in the province of British Columbia. That former Liberal cabinet minister, who was Marshall Smith's former boss, hired Marshall Smith, who was then clean and sober by all accounts, to be the executive director. But there were some problems. There was a story that broke a little while ago where there were allegations from multiple sources that Marshall Smith had leveraged his role as executive director to, some people might say, and maybe have, force people who were going through recovery, who were patients at this recovery facility, to make phone calls based on a leadership campaign that was going on. So these phone calls were soliciting support for Kevin Falcon during his 2011 leadership bid, which ended up being unsuccessful. Now, Marshall Smith left shortly after that whole thing happened, but there was a story that came out from the Tyee, Jason Kenney's favorite newspaper. Maybe there were some more things going on. There's a report that was released that's highlighted, let's go with some problems. So the center wasn't licensed by Northern Health as a community care facility, and it would not meet licensing requirements for standards of care, which is not great. Staff were trained in administering medications, and this is another quote, multiple sources report medication errors on a regular basis. And in fact, the pharmacist that was hired by Baldy Hughes said, and this is another quote, numerous and serious concerns about medication management over the past year and a half. Now, this was allegedly during Marshall Smith's tenure as executive director. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, what kind of medications could they possibly need? Well, people need medications, all kinds of different medications. Just because somebody has an opioid addiction doesn't preclude the fact that maybe they were using those opioids for pain. And if they're getting off the opioids, they're still going to need other medications to manage their pain. They're still going to need potentially medications to manage chronic health conditions like lung conditions or heart conditions. I mean, sky's the limit. There's lots of people who take medications on a daily basis, and these are the medications that the staff were theoretically supposed to be handing out, but they didn't have any training to do it. And according to the pharmacist who was hired to do all of the medication administration to the people who were supposed to then give the medications to the patients, he had concerns about the medication management. A lot of people had apparently concerns about the fact that it was considered to be a closed community. So you hear a lot of the UCP talking about, hey, we've got these communities. They're communities. It's a community thing where you're going to have these rehabilitation communities and people live inside these communities. Well, Baldy Hughes was also one of these communities, but there were a lot of concerns with the fact that it was considered to be a closed community. So you didn't get any contact with the outside world. And there was a lot of concerns regarding accountability and transparency for the program. They only provided the AA abstinence-based 12-step program. And I want to be clear, I'm not dunking on AA. I know a lot of people, I've had conversations with a lot of people who say for them, the AA model changed their lives. It saved their lives. There's a lot of people who absolutely swear by it. There's also a lot of people for whom it doesn't work. And that's because different things drive people's use of substances. And for some people, straight up abstinence isn't going to be the thing that is part of their recovery, because recovery is a different thing for different people. So they didn't provide any other supports. It was AA, abstinence or nothing, which again, given what Danielle Smith has publicly on the record said, she was on Power and Politics with Vashi Capellos just a little while ago, where she said that Alberta absolutely is not going to consider any sort of safe supply or harm reduction measures. It's going to be abstinence or nothing. Some other things that were problems, the intake assessments where patients would be assessed. Hey, how you doing, Timmy? Welcome to Baldy Hughes. Let's have a chat about everything that's going on. They weren't completed consistently. And some of those things include suicide risks. So you could have people who were being admitted to this facility who were at high risk of suicide, and that wasn't investigated, documented at all. Discharge plans were often not appropriately completed or non-existent. The food was inadequate, and aftercare programs were mostly non-existent as well. Reading again from the story here, the promise was that Baldy Hughes would offer a long-term therapeutic community where people would receive treatment, work on the site, and develop skills, just like the proposed Alberta model. But the review found the on-site farm and work programs weren't operating. So they said, hey, you know what? We're going to have this farm. It's going to be great. People are going to do chores. They're going to do their treatment. They're going to do chores. Is this all sounding familiar? Problem was, none of those things actually happened. So the center had been developing work programs in 2009. So again, we're talking about the time period where Marshall Smith was in charge to give residents skills and credentials. But not only were those not completed, they were apparently abandoned. So people were going into this program thinking that they were going to have access to all of these skills, and it didn't happen. Now, I have to say, before I read the next quote, Marshall Smith apparently denies all of the accusations that were in the first story that we put up on the screen there. But I think it's really important to read a quote from that story. So again, Marshall Smith denies what I'm about to read here, to be clear. Drug addicts seeking help at a BC rehab facility allegedly found themselves doing BC Liberal Party political work and providing free labor at party-connected Prince George businesses, a Glacier Media investigation has found. Further documents show the Baldy Hughes therapeutic community was used to funnel contract dollars to party donors for work at the site operated by the BC New Hope Recovery Society since 2007. So not only are the allegations that people who were getting treatment were being utilized as free labor, but there's allegations that, hey, one of the things they included was a particular type of diesel motor that was trialed there, and a party donor received the benefits of having the government funding trialing the motor there. Again, to be clear, Marshall Smith has denied all of these allegations. Lots of people lined up on the other side saying the allegations are absolutely true. Do with that what you will. Marshall Smith left, like I said, in 2011, shortly after the leadership race and all of the allegations that came around with it. But again, this is where it gets to be really, really important to highlight. The architect of Alberta's drug policy is somebody whose only experience appears to be horrifyingly mismanaging a treatment facility and the lived experience through his own addiction. And I'm not denigrating that. I'm absolutely not. Everybody's lived experience is different. But part of recognizing lived experience is recognizing that everybody's lived experience is different. And that's one thing that it seems like Marshall Smith hasn't done. Now, this is where I'm going to do a little bit of a mid-show plug for a conversation that we've got coming up on Sunday. I am so excited and so humbled to be able to present it. I'll warn you now, like if you watch the show to listen to me talk, you're going to be a little disappointed. But the speaker that we have, the guest that we have, more than covers what I would normally contribute. We've got Guy Felicella, who's coming, who we had a conversation with. We're going to have that episode up for our Patreon supporters in just a couple of days here. I have been doing this show for the better part of 5 years now. God help me. And there's a few conversations where I've been like, whoa, that was intense. My conversation with Guy is at the top of the list. Guy's story is unbelievably powerful. He's somebody who lived through the worst parts of the Vancouver, the east side, the Lower East Side, East Hastings. He wrestled with substance use and addiction for a long period of time, and he has managed to get himself to a place where he's been sober for quite a period of time, and he's actually doing outreach now. He's a huge advocate for harm reduction. He's also a huge advocate for addressing the toxic supply issue. And the stories that he shares in this interview, I challenge anyone to listen to him speak and not go, oh yeah, we got to deal with this toxic supply problem, because it's just such a powerful conversation. So I wanted to make sure that I plugged that, because it is a huge, 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 impactful conversation. So there's that. Moving on from there, one of the other big stories that popped out while we were on our little break, Dynalife. It's This one's fun because it's just such an unmitigated disaster. It's impressively bad. So the story with this one is, and we'll do another little bit of a history review for those of you who maybe haven't heard the bits that we've done on Dynalife before. But the story with Dynalife is they were the provider in Edmonton for a good chunk of time. When the NDP got elected, they said, hey, you know what? We should bring all lab work under the Alberta Health Services umbrella. We're going to build us a super lab. We're going to have standards of control. Everything's going to be the same. It's going to be wonderful. They started work on that. They spent tens of millions of dollars getting that facility and that program up and running. And then they lost the 2019 election. And one of the campaign promises that Jason Kenney threw out there was, hey, you know what? This is socialism. This is nationalism. It's the worst. We're going to put a stop to it. And they did. Rather than move Dynalife into the AHS umbrella at the time, they decided to move all lab services under the Dynalife umbrella. And they spent some money on that process too. Destroyed the work that was done on the super lab, spent I think it was $12 million remediating the site that the super lab was supposed to be on. But the problem was Dynalife couldn't handle the volume. They did okay in Edmonton. They did okay in the areas where they were already providing service. But in certain rural areas, and definitely Calgary, there was a huge impact on wait times. People were not able to get their lab work done in a timely manner. Lots of patients were raising the alarm about it. Lots of physicians, healthcare workers were raising the alarm about it. People simply couldn't get appointments. And this became a bigger and bigger conversation over the last few months, because what are we going to do about this ongoing crisis, really, in regards to people being able to get the lab work that they needed when they needed it in a timely manner. Now, this was a problem that Danielle Smith herself acknowledged. And this is where it gets fun, because turning back the clock mid-July, the NDP leaked a story about, hey, you know what? We hear things are bad with the Dynalife stuff. We hear things are really horrible. We hear that the UCP is actually considering buying up Dynalife and putting all of the lab services under the AHS umbrella, which is what was supposed to happen in the first place. So when you think about the incredible amount of money and the unaccountable human suffering that was caused by this purely ideological decision by the UCP, it's a pretty big deal. Well, on July 31st, John Braid released a column where he quoted government sources. An agreement on how to fix this is being hammered out and will not include more public money. An announcement is likely to come this week. Now, again, that was released on August 1st, July 31st, updated August 1st. Just over 2 weeks later, Adriana LaGrange announces, yeah, so you know what? We're actually going to buy back Dynalife. Because they can't do it. So we're gonna buy Dynalife. We're gonna take over all of the services, which not only is I mean, it's a step in the right direction, but it's certainly going to include a lot of public money. No figures have been released in regards to the overall costs of this yet, but it's not going to be cheap. And like I said earlier, when we consider the amount of money that was spent in destroying the super lab, which they're going to have to in some way replace, and remediating the super lab and everything else that happened and all of the health consequences that people experienced because they couldn't get access to timely lab results. This is a prime example of what goes wrong when governments decide that rather than do what's right based on evidence, when they're going to do ideological decisions alone, like, I don't know, buy Tylenol and ibuprofen from Turkey at like 4 times the market value just so they can try to own the feds and then fail miserably. It's taxpayers, it's Albertans that ultimately suffer. A couple other light little things to touch on before we get into our 2 big ones. Last thing we want to kind of touch on is this little tweet here from Danielle Smith. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this tweet because the graphic is replacing just 20% of Chinese coal with Canadian natural gas would save the equivalent emissions of all of Canada. I mean, it's a wonderful hypothetical. Why don't we replace just 30%? Why don't we replace just 40%? If we're just imagining things, let's just imagine all the way. But the idea behind this is if only these other countries that were larger emitters than Canada would do more and perhaps buy from us, we wouldn't have to change anything, really. And we've seen this argument over and over and over again, particularly during the wildfires, where people have said, hey, you know what? If Canada if we cut all of our emissions to zero, if we just did Flintstones style cars, we wouldn't make a dent in climate change anyway. So really, what's the point? We've seen Danielle Smith's bestie, David Parker, who, boy, are we going to be talking about in a bit. He did a whole rant about how, anybody who's saying that we should be doing anything to address emissions, they're communist. I'm not sure that meets the definition of communism, but I'm no poli-sci professor, so do with that what you will. But where it gets particularly interesting, where it gets particularly important, where people should really be paying attention is at the bottom there, right under the bottom there. What does it say? Source. Who's the source for this amazing statistic? If China just replaced 20% of their coal with good old-fashioned Canadian natural gas, we could save the planet. Who's the source for that? Why, it's none other than the Bigfoot hunters themselves, the Canadian Energy Centre. So let's be clear about what's going on here. We've got the Premier of Alberta, who had some harsh things to say about the War Room during her leadership campaign. We've got her saying, hey, there's this government-funded, totally not FOIPable, totally opaque. We don't even know if the same MLAs who lost their jobs in the last election, if they're still the directors of this thing. We don't know because nothing's publicly available, despite the fact that it's entirely taxpayer funded. the same folks that went after Bigfoot, the same folks that couldn't get their logos figured out like 3 times in a row, and at one point hired a marketing firm with a demonstrably fictional dog. I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. That government-funded, opaque agency, that's who we're going to trust and rely on for information. It's absolutely mind-blowing that the Premier of Alberta is using her PR firm to provide statistics that she's going to try to use to justify, hey, maybe if we just convince China that we don't have to change anything and we can just put our fingers in our ears and go la, la, la all day long. But speaking of putting our fingers in our ears and going la, la, la all day long, one of the big stories that came out over the last couple of weeks, this broke on August 3rd, is Alberta's mind-boggling kind of decision to pause the development of all renewables over 1 megawatt. So any power generation that produces more than 1 megawatt, that's on and then it was initially introduced as a 6-month moratorium, and then everybody did the math. We're like, hold on, that's actually 7 months. So there's a 7-month moratorium that's been put in place. Now, this was, like I said, announced on August 3rd, and it's important to realize a couple of things in regards to how it was announced. There was an email that went out. There was no press conference. There was no consultation with any of the people involved in the industry. There was no social media posts about it from the minister responsible for the decision until the next day. This is a huge policy shift. When we see, speaking of China, you want to talk about people who are going all in on renewables. China's doing some incredible work in regards to getting into renewables, but also the United States is doing incredible work. They're putting all kinds of money into getting into renewables. To just say, hey, you know what? We're going to sit in our hands for 7 months and not do any kind of a press conference, not do any kind of big announcement is absolutely mind-blowing. And it was condemned widely. It's important to realize that this was a decision that was made as we're seeing tremendous harm from wildfires across the country. And all of the reputable experts that are out there are saying, we're seeing all of these wildfires. It's not so much that the wildfires are being directly, like climate change isn't throwing matches on the ground and doing their best. But what is happening with climate change is stuff's getting drier than it's been for a very long time. And because everything's so dry, it takes way less to start any kind of a fire, whether it's lightning, whether it's sparks off of a train, or I don't know, sparks off the back of a semi-trailer. These are all things that can happen. But the bigger concern that a lot of people raised, including renowned economist Trevor Tombe, had to do with the fact that there's already economic uncertainty in Canada for a whole list of reasons. But for politicians to, on a dime, make an announcement, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to pause all of the approvals. There's billions of dollars in investment that's coming towards this industry. And in fact, one of the problems that they cite is that the body that does the reviews and approvals is literally overwhelmed by the volume of people who are wanting to get into renewables. That's how serious this whole situation is. But it's also important to realize that when we're talking about the renewables piece, there's a lot of people whose jobs are going to be affected by this. Now, projects that have already been approved, those are going to continue to go. So there will still be work available, but there's a lot of people who are going to not have the amount of work that they counted on having. This is an economic hammer to the province of Alberta at a time where cost of living continues to go through the roof. All of this leads up to, I almost feel bad. I don't. To be clear, I don't. But I almost feel bad when Danielle Smith decides to do a press conference all by herself. When she gets a couple of ministers involved and she got some other people in there that she can kind of kick the answers to, it's less bad. But when she decides to fly solo, the first 10 minutes of the press conference are always fine because she's reading off a script. She's real good at reading off scripts. But when she gets forced to improvise, that's where things start to get a little out of touch. One of the things that many politicians get criticized for is, do you know the price of milk? And what that's supposed to say is, do you know what it's like for the average person? And when you consider how many Albertans are living paycheck to paycheck right now, when how many Albertans are living off of credit card debt right now, or lines of credit right now, because things are just that tight. They're 1 month away from potentially becoming homeless. That's how serious it are. This answer from Danielle Smith is particularly mind-blowing.
From City News. It's interesting that Alberta government is standing for the rights of Albertans against Ottawa, but what about the Albertans who are working in the renewable sector? This was a bomb that just exploded on their head one morning. They're on the verge of joblessness. Is the government doing anything for them? Is there any hope, any news, any resources for them?
6 months from now, we will have a policy in place and we'll be able to take the pause off. Look, guys, we have had companies that have gone 10 years through a regulatory process at the federal level, spending $1 billion and having to pull the plug because they saw no end in sight. 6 months. You will have your answers in 6 months' time. We made it 6 months so that we could provide that level of certainty, so that everybody knows where they will be able to build, so that we will know how we're going to bring baseload power on in order to be able to counter the intermittency, and there will be a solution for how we address the end-of-life reclamation issues. So
there are many companies whose projects have been paused, and there are no future projects for at least 6 months. So all their employees will be laid off. So you want those Albertans to just pause their life for 6 months and just sit at home?
It's 6 months. We think that is a reasonable amount of time for us to be able to make the decisions that we have to.
That's the same premier who lost her mind over health protections during a pandemic, who thought that it was unconscionable that people should have to suffer economic hardship just because of this virus. She went to war over the fact that there were health restrictions in place. She made it a key part of her leadership campaign. But when it comes to putting the hold on renewables in the province of Alberta, it's just 6 months. People should be fine. But then the question came up of, how does anyone have any trust in the government? How are investors supposed to have any trust in the government when policy decisions like this that affect billions of dollars of economic development get made without any consultation, without any heads up, and apparently on a whim?
The question here is, why should anybody trust the government of Alberta to have a consistent policy for international investors? We're talking about billions of dollars that have just been stalled in Alberta. Why should anybody invest in Alberta when you're making these kinds of decisions without consultation with the industries that are affected?
Well, you'll notice that in every other municipality or every other province, the power grid is a Crown corporation. So we're one of the few jurisdictions where it's a bit of a Wild West in how power comes onto the electricity grid. And the principal thing that a power generator should produce should be power. That should be so obvious to everyone that is what our power grid is designed to do, is to produce power. And when I have intermittent power that's only available 13% of the time for solar and 33% of the time for wind, I have to make sure that we have got enough power coming on to be able to compensate for that. And the fact that we had 7 instances in the last year where we ended up being at the max on our power grid, and solar and wind, in 2 cases, were producing less than 100 megawatts of power, I know that this is an even more urgent situation. So this is an extraordinary time. And if we don't look at the signals that we're getting from the market, from the reliability of the grid, and from those who are coming back and telling us that they would like to see a pause so we can figure some of these things out, I think that would be irresponsible. So we're going to be addressing all of these issues.
Costs, they're the worst. It's wild that Danielle Smith, who just nationalized, in effect, lab services, is arguing that because we're the Wild West, we're the private electricity market, we've got all this stuff to contend with. Like, it's Danielle Smith, the libertarian, seems to be making a very strong argument for socialized electrical grids, which is just a surprise given her history. Now, there's another exchange that comes up, and this is where I wanted to just give some props. There's a journalist who used to cover Alberta politics, named Emma Graney, and she used to do the live tweets of the legislative sessions, particularly during question period, and she was so good with the gifts. But you don't mess with her. And I don't know that Smith has crossed paths with Emma Graney, because Emma just doesn't have any time for any kind of spin or any kind of BS. And Smith got to get a little bit of taste of that. So we're going to share that clip just because it's so, this is journalism is at its apex as far as I'm concerned.
With all due respect, though, I mean, that's not what you said earlier. You said that this is what they're asking for, and they weren't. But anyway, my next question
they did ask for us to do
letters.
a
So you just told us, look, the letters, that's not what they said. So I'm just saying.
They did.
So when you're also talking
just
about...
Just for the record, they did ask us to put a pause on wind and solar, and that was what I was asking.
Yeah, I know, but not about transmission. That's my point. And so you're bringing this up as reasoning, and yet it's not, in fact, what they had asked for. So that is my point. Anyway, let's go to the next question, because apparently you do have to wrap up soon. So when it does come to renewables and clean electricity, you were talking earlier about the federal government's clean electricity regulations and saying how the federal government had just dropped this on you guys. And then they say they were going to do it and you asked them to pause. Sure, we did it. And then you asked them to kind of just, can you hold on a second? And yet when it comes to renewables, you just turned around and did this to the industry with zero consultation. You didn't tell the association. And in fact, the day that your government made this decision, the companies that were at the heart of this, none of them were even told by the AUC. So how is it that your government can justify turning around and doing this when you didn't bother consulting with anyone who it would affect?
Well, I would say that if they had been listening to the regulators and then they had been listening to the RMA...
They literally got letters the day before from the AUC asking for information.
I mentioned it at the Rural Municipalities Association when I spoke there in April, because I came on right after the Alberta Utilities Commission boss when she revealed that we had in the queue 23,000 megawatts of wind and solar and nothing else. We've got no baseload power. So I did say we are going... I mentioned that back in April. So whether you guys didn't cover it or whether it didn't, they weren't paying attention to what the RMA was asking for, it should have been very clear that the RMA for a long time has been very concerned about the way in which these decisions are made, about the impact it's having on farmland, about the impact that it's also having on their landowners, and about the unanswered question about reclamation. So
it's okay for your government to pull the rug out of renewables. It's not okay for any other government to pull the rug out of other industries that haven't listened, apparently.
Look, we exist in the real world, Emma. And in the real world, we have to be practical and we have to put policies on the table that we know are going to be able to succeed and we know are going to be able to address the concerns that we have.
Emma Graney now does energy for the Globe and Mail, which is why she was involved in that presser, because it's very clearly an energy issue. But I just want to say, my God, that's the kind of journalism that we need in this day and age, because that was just like candy. But there's important things to realize. In the middle of that exchange, Danielle Smith switched who she was talking about. She talked about the fact that, well, there's the energy regulator, and they said that there's all of this energy coming on from wind and solar, but we've got no base load. And that's where maybe some questions might start to be answered. Because Danielle Smith has done a lot of talking about how she wants the future of Alberta to be natural gas. And she's horrified that there's no new natural gas baseload projects that are coming into effect. Well, we got to have this pause so that we can deal with the wind and the solar stuffs. And also, she just throws this off-the-cuff comment about the baseload. which is a fascinating little disclosure. But where it starts to get really interesting is in the next few clips. I'm just going to play the first one, and we'll go from there.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I did want to follow up on Emma's question because I'm looking at this letter dated July 21st from the Alberta Utilities Commission. I don't see anywhere where it calls for a moratorium. It calls for a dedicated period of engagement with stakeholders, followed by government direction, either in the form of provincial policy or new legislation. So I'm wondering, maybe help me out, where are you seeing that they call for a pause or moratorium during the stakeholder engagement?
Well, I can tell you, when you're making changes to the rules that we are going to have to make to ensure that we've got reliability, to ensure we've got affordability, and to deal with reclamation, you want to make sure that the rules are clear before you make any approvals. You can't have a period of time where a bunch of approvals are taking place and then the new rules come down 6 months from now. That's going to create a lot of uncertainty and an unlevel playing field. And so we need to go through having asked us to look at these issues, the responsible thing to do is to do the pause, do the stakeholder consultation, come up with the new parameters, and then release them so everybody can make their investment decisions once we all know the rules of the game.
Can't have any progress unless everybody knows what the rules are. You can't make rules up as you go. You can't do that. That would be wildly unfair. There's so many things that are unaddressed. The reclamation piece, we don't know. We don't know what the rules are with reclamation. We don't know what the rules are with all of these things. We gotta come up with some rules here, because you can't just have an industry run unchecked. And you have to know that the next question was about oil and gas.
Anyone want to invest in a province that cancels large projects on a moment's notice without at least advising that industry that's affected?
One of the things I'm disappointed by that I haven't seen the media cover is that we were asked to do this by our regulators. We made the letters available to every member of the media on this, and it was released at the same time as the letter from the Rural Municipalities Association. The Alberta Electric System Operator asked for us to do a pause to make sure that we could address issues of stability of the grid. The Alberta Utilities Commission asked us to do a pause while we figured out how we could deal with end-of-life reclamation. And the Rural Municipalities Association passed a motion asking for us to make sure that we're not building solar and wind on prime agriculture land. So I would just encourage you to dig up that original press release that we put out and look at what the two regulators have asked us to do.
Oh, you'd encourage us to do that, would you? Anybody want to guess what we did? We looked up that release. Here it is. Here's the release right here. This is the email that was sent out on the day of the launch, the announcement of the great renewables cancellation, I guess. There's a bunch of quotes. Nathan Newdorf: "We're proud of our leadership in responsible renewable energy development, and we're committed to continued growth. This approach will provide future renewable investments with the certainty and clarity required for long-term development." I guess screw the current ones, but the future ones, they're going to know what's going on. It's going to be great. Now, they also included a quote which is implied to be part of the rural municipalities of Alberta, the RMA, you've heard Smith refer to her a couple of times now, that endorses the pause. But let's pay close attention to what the wording is here. RMA is pleased by this decision to develop a province-wide plan for how the industry can grow strategically and responsibly. Rural municipalities cover roughly 85% of Alberta's land, and their voices must be included in the approval process for all renewable energy projects. We look forward to working with the government of Alberta to create an approval process that balances provincial and local perspectives and positions Alberta as leader in responsible renewables energy development. So what the RMA is saying very clearly there is, hey, yeah, we think it's great that there's a plan. We want there to be a plan, but there's no word from the RMA about the pause. Now, you can see at the bottom on the right-hand side there's the related information. Oh, look, there's the links that Smith is talking about. You should have read the letters, because there's a letter from the AUC, there's a letter from the AASO. Now, we covered this in an episode before we went on break, but it's worth going back to again, so we're gonna, because when you take a look at what these letters actually say, the letter from the AUC, as that reporter, Catherine Gurkowski, pointed out earlier, makes it very clear, hey, we've got these issues that we need to address. We're getting overwhelmed. The two important issues that come to the forefront of the Commission's public interest considerations, the development of power plants on high-value agricultural lands and the lack of mandatory reclamation security requirements for power plants. Those are what the two concerns are. We'd like to put together a plan, they say, to address these issues, because right now we're doing it case by case. Nowhere in there does the Alberta Utilities Commission ask for a pause. And the letter that's linked to from that release that Danielle Smith claims demonstrates that the Alberta Electric System Operator is asking for a pause starts with, thank you for advising us that the government of Alberta will be requesting the Alberta Utilities Commission hold an inquiry in land use and reclamation issues, and that the AUC intends to review its hearing process with respect to these issues, necessitating a one-time 6-month, it's 7, temporary pause on the AUC accepting new power plant applications. So let's be really, really clear here. The two letters that are linked to off of that press release, neither of them say, we'd like a pause, please. One of them acknowledges that the decision has already been made 2 weeks before it was publicly announced, 2 weeks before other companies, all of the investors were told about it. And the other one says, we have some issues we need to resolve. But nowhere in there does it say, hey, you know what? We need to do this pause in order to make it happen. Now, you might think that if some of the framework was already in place, that you wouldn't have to pause all of the acceptance of new proposals. You wouldn't have to pause the approvals, because again, the question comes up: what about oil and gas?
The energy mandate letter it calls to develop a program to incentivize oil and gas well cleanup, and I'm wondering, will there be a moratorium while that program is being developed?
Well, we have already put into place a policy where our oil and natural gas companies have to do a 3% spend on their liabilities each year. So this year, that's $760 million. The sites that I have a grave concern about are ones that are multi-million-dollar cleanups that come from the 1960s. It's a shame that that governments continued to push those forward and didn't demand that they were going to be cleaned up, but we're going to demand that they be cleaned up. We have to make sure that we have some certainty that we can give to landowners and to rural municipalities and First Nations that when development happens on their property, the land is going to be returned to its natural condition as quickly as possible after the development is at the end of its economic life. So we already have a proposal in place that is going to deal with the lion's share of liability, which is the mandatory spend, and we may have to look at some particular policies around how we clean up the worst wells from the 1960s and 70s.
We've already got policies in place for oil and gas. Most of it's covered. It's not like we've got $250 billion of abandoned wells that we're going to have to account for at some time. Oh, wait, yes, that's exactly what's happening here. But our policies for oil and gas are good. We don't want to mess with oil and gas. We don't want to do that. But the problem is we don't have any policies for these renewables. It's the Wild West. And again, the rural municipalities of Alberta, they were so concerned. What did the rural municipalities have to say again? Let's take a look. Again, the RMA has been advocating for changes in regulation and approval processes with the AUC and initiated several projects related to the approval processes currently in place. The RMA currently has a member committee on quasi-judicial agencies that is gathering information on the experiences of members in interacting with quasi-judicial agencies such as the AUC in relation to government projects. Yada, 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 yada. But basically what they say is they think that coming up with a plan is a good thing, but at no point do they endorse a pause in the approvals. But we heard Smith talk about, Smith said some things there. She was talking about, you know what, the RMA, they did a policy resolution that was asking for a pause on the renewables because of this wild lack of policies for any sort of green production. I wonder what that, if only there was some way to find what that policy resolution was, what it actually said, what it asked for. Oh, what's this here? Therefore, be it resolved that the municipalities of Alberta request that the government of Alberta implement a mandated collection of adequate securities for future reclamation of renewable energy projects on private lands, either by requiring renewable energy product proponents to post a reclamation surety bond as a condition of any renewable energy project approvals by any other means. Further, be it resolved that the amount of the required securities be calculated based on data-driven projections of actual reclamation costs to protect municipalities and residents of Alberta from incurring costs associated with the decommission of renewable energy projects. So what the RMA said in their resolution that Danielle Smith takes so seriously is, hey, you know what? If you could come up with a way to make sure that people have to put the money up front, that'd be swell. That's it. That's the resolution. There was nothing about a pause. There was nothing about putting a major stop in investment. But Danielle Smith keeps talking about, gosh, the policies though. We got to have the policies in place. And she makes it sound like, again, it's the Wild West. I wonder, did the government of Alberta perhaps respond to this resolution? And if they did, I wonder when it was. Oh, look. They responded on November 9th of 2022. Hey, I forget, who was the premier of Alberta on November 9th, 2022? Oh, yes, it was Danielle Smith. Sonia Savage responded as Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, and she referenced the mandate letter that she had been given by Smith. And let's take a look at a couple of the very specific wordings. The government of Alberta is committed to ensuring renewable energy operations such as solar and wind projects are decommissioned and reclaimed responsibly when operations cease. Requirements for operators are outlined. Oh no, these policies exist in Alberta's Conservation and Reclamation Directive for renewable energy operations. They provide the link. Renewable energy operators are financially responsible for environmental obligations at the end of a project's life and must demonstrate to the AUC that they have sufficient funds to cover estimated decommissioning and reclamation costs. Operators must follow Commission's Rule 007, and then they give the link for that. Landowners have the right to allow or deny access to their property for a solar, wind, or wind energy project, to negotiate reclamation security under their surface lease agreement, and to seek legal advice before signing an agreement regarding development on their property. So let's just be super clear here. In November of 2022, Danielle Smith's UCP government said, you know what? We've got these processes in place. Nobody's forcing anybody to develop solar and wind on their property. If somebody owns high value agricultural land, if that's something that's in their family, they are under no obligation to allow Wind X or whatever to come onto their land and set up a wind farm or a solar farm. It's the property owner's discretion. That was the official position of Danielle Smith's UCP government just a few months ago. But now, all of a sudden, we've got some kind of driving need, which hasn't been explained because all of the reasons that Danielle Smith has put up are utterly dismissible. Not just by economists, not just by policy experts, but by her own government in November of 2022. Which leaves the question, what's really going on? And right now, there's no answer for that. But we do know Danielle Smith really, really wants to see more baseload, and she really, really wants Alberta to be a natural gas province. Now, there's two kickers to this story before we get into our last thing, and we're going to bring in a consultant in just a little bit here to maybe provide a little bit of color commentary, some context, some things. But there's two kickers we got to address. First of all, and I wish I was kidding about this because it's just so bad, Rebecca Schultz is traveling to Germany to tout Alberta's brilliance in the field of renewables days after this decision has been announced. Minister of Environment, Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, will travel to Germany to promote Alberta's emissions reductions, technologies, and responsible energy sector. And I'm reading that, for the record, off of the official press release. So we're giving the press releases some attention, Dani. We read them and everything. But the real kicker to all of this, and it's more of a kick in the teeth, I suspect, to anybody who supported Danielle Smith during her leadership race. And in 2022, let's see, December of 2022. So just to be clear, the clip that we're about to play comes almost 2 months after her government, her minister of Environment and Protected Areas, said to the RMA, hey, we've got policies and procedures in place. Nobody's forcing anyone to give up their high-value, high-yield agricultural land. Things are under control. Thanks for the feedback. 2 months after, that was the official line from the government. What did Danielle Smith say about making sure that things continue to move forward in the province of Alberta?
You've just got to take action and troubleshoot along the way and just see incremental improvement. And so that's what I hope people will see from my type of approach.
Now, anybody who's been following the show knows what clip we're going to end the show with, because I brought that interview back. But I want to get into the last little chunk that we have here. We got to talk about Turtleneck. That's what we're gonna call him. We're gonna call him Turtleneck. We're talking about David Parker. David Parker got quite a bit of headlines this week. He made the rounds on all of the shows, not ours, mind you, and he won't be. But David Parker, he went on a media blitz to talk about the things and the stuff and his plans for the future. He's quite the character. For anybody who's not familiar with David Parker, he's been a conservative organizer for quite some time. Worked on Jason Kenney, a bunch of Jason Kenney stuff. He's was involved ostensibly with Aaron O'Toole to some degree, and he's set up a group, or taken over a group, depending on whose version you want to go with. I don't want to speculate. But called Take Back Alberta. And Take Back Alberta came ostensibly out of the COVID precautions that were put into place. They drove an RV around. A bunch of current UCP MLAs and ministers, I might add, took the time to sign the RV of Take Back Alberta. And they've had a bit of, they've built some momentum. So one of the things that we've seen out of Take Back Alberta is they've been very, very clear what some of their goals are. They want to take over the UCP, and they've got a really good start going on for that, because they ran a boatload of candidates for the UCP board, and they got half the board elected. By the way, there was only half of the board up for election. And there's been considerable drama that's come out of this. David Parker threw a very public temper tantrum when the current president didn't make the prices for the upcoming UCP AGM as low as he wanted them to be, and it turned into a very public spat, where he took to the Twitter machine and said all kinds of things. But there's been lots of reporting about the plans that Take Back Alberta have for the UCP. They're very clear. They want to control the party, because they believe that if you control the party, then you control the government, if it's the ruling government. Now, it's important to note that David Parker also has some very close relationships with the Premier of Alberta. It's public knowledge now that she attended his wedding. It's public knowledge now that wedding was with one of the reporters from True North, and that there was some collaboration of messaging that was going on between Take Back Alberta and True North, which is all kinds of wild. David Parker and Take Back Alberta have been very, very clear that they have every intention of they controlled the removal, they claim, of Jason Kenney. They want to ensure that Danielle Smith, apparently she gives really good wedding presents, I don't know, but they want to make sure that she stays in office. And he's got some strong opinions about some issues that have a lot of people deeply concerned. We're going to play a clip. It's a little bit longer, but it's worth listening to the whole thing.
Anti-human, and it must be stopped. The truth of the matter is that anyone who teaches you that you are a disease on this planet, anyone who teaches you that children should be castrated and made infertile, they are anti-human. And they must be stopped. And how are we going to stop them, you ask? Well, the answer is simple. Right now, you are taking the first step. Never forget that the world is not run by the people by all the people. It is run by the people who show up. And for too long, we have not been the people who have shown up. For too long, we have hidden. For too long, we have said, we cannot make a difference. They are just going to do this. That is not true. There is more of us than there is of them. And so I say this to all of you. Who here feels that horrible things are happening in our libraries? Raise your hand. And how many of you here today sit on library boards? There we go, we've got one. Thank you, sir. The answer right now is that we have to get engaged. Every one of you has to begin participating in their democracy. If you want them to leave your kids alone, you have to be the ones making the decision about how that happens. And I tell you that Take Back Alberta is about one thing. It is not about your religion. It is not about your creed. It is not about your skin color. It is about this. It is about you taking back your democracy from your own apathy. That is what this country was founded on. That is what you must do, because they will not leave your kids alone. They will not leave your children alone unless you get engaged. Unless you become the people that is changing things. So I say this to end. I don't want to speak too long, but I will say this. Leave our kids alone. Leave our kids.
That's David Parker speaking at an anti-LGBTQ rally that occurred several weeks ago. Now, there was a series of rallies in the run-up to the Stampede. Fortunately, they kind of lost momentum because I think everybody there went, oh, y'all are crazy. But that's David Parker speaking at that rally. And he makes some very, very clear references. He also has a little bit of fun with wordplay. The reference to libraries is very much a not so subtle reference to trans story time, or the drag story time, reading where drag kings, queens read stories to kids. Now, these are simply drag performers who are reading to kids in costume. That's it. That's the ballgame. Nobody's being forced to have their kids attend there. People who take their kids to enjoy the reading with royalty are people who are choosing to do so. So, to be clear, the only people who are trying to influence their views or insert their views or assert their views when it comes to the trans story time or the reading with royalty are the people who are saying that it shouldn't be happening, because nobody's kids are being taken there when they aren't wanting to take their kids there. That's the bottom line. But it's being misrepresented in a tremendous way. That's what Mr. Parker's talking about when he talks about the libraries. When he talks, Take Back Alberta isn't about religion. Yeah, that would totally explain why they open most of their meetings with the Lord's Prayer, why they sing gospel songs. It's not about religion, except for when it is. Now, this is something that Mr. Parker is very, very good at. He's very, very good at presenting multiple views of the same little object and presenting it in different lights, even though it fundamentally is what it is. This is a far-right, bigoted, religious far-right organization that is trying to get people mobilized. Benita Peterson is one of the main organizers of Take Back Alberta, and she's the Benita Peterson who was organizing protests against Pride crosswalks. One of the other main organizers for Take Back Alberta is Marco Van Hugenbos, who kind of broke up with David Parker for a little bit, but then they got back together, and now Marco's still doing the Take Back Alberta shtick. Marco Van Hugenbos is one of the people who is still facing charges in the Coutts blockade. These are not Joe and Jill average. These are people who have extreme views. Benita Peterson is one of the people who showed up in front of hospitals and called nurses who had been working 12-hour shifts in COVID wards liars. She said they were lying about COVID. They were lying about the patients they were treated. They were apparently lying about their exhaustion as they were trying to save people's lives. Benita Peterson had no problems organizing protests outside of these hospitals. Benita Peterson is one of the people who organized the Jericho marches. Take Back Alberta is an extremely dangerous group, and anybody who says otherwise is either a part of Take Back Alberta or they're extraordinarily ill-informed. Which brings us to this week. Because this week, Mr. Parker got probably the biggest chunk of limelight he's gotten pretty much ever when he made an appearance on the show Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson. Now we're going to get into the logistics and the questions around Real Talk having Mr. Parker on. I said at the beginning of this segment, we wouldn't have David Parker on our show for the same reason that we wouldn't have Danielle Smith on our show. They're just going to spew unmitigated bullshit, and I don't have the time or the resources to fact check them on the go. And that's what we do. When we have guests on the show, if somebody lies, we say, I think you might be lying there. Here's what the actual evidence is. We do it civilly. We do it politely because we believe in conversations here. But the problem is the volume of conspiracy theory bullshit that some people are happy to spew. So logistically, we just can't have some of these pinheads on our show. We'll make fun of them because they're public domain. So thanks, turtleneck. But Mr. Parker made his hand very, very clear on the Jesperson show. We want to play that clip.
Slates for the next municipal election in the province?
I don't know if we're going to be focused on municipal. We will definitely be focused on school boards, and it is our clear mission, and I say this in all of our meetings, to get as many people on school boards as possible in the next municipal, which is elected at the same time as municipal.
Not really hiding anything there. Take Back Alberta believes very strongly in a Judeo-Christian, far-right Judeo-Christian belief system. They open their meetings with prayers. Mr. Parker can say as much as he wants that, no, we're not religious. But as soon as you start any public meeting with a prayer, guess what? Y'all are religious. Mr. Parker comes from an extreme religious background himself. Mr. Parker condemns the reading with royalty. There's no other shortage of conspiracy theories. We're not going to go. We could just play the whole Jesperson interview, but that would be boring. You can go watch that if you have the inclination. But there's no shortage of conspiracy theories that Mr. Parker believes into. We are talking about radicalized people, period. Those radicalized people are extremely well organized. They have been doing nothing but organizing for the last 3 years. They are organized enough that they were able to replace half of the UCP board. They are organized enough that they were able to get rid of a sitting premier. They were organized enough and are organized enough that they were able to elect candidates who aligned with their views. I can name 2 off the top of my head who have said profoundly hateful things that got elected, that are sitting in the legislature currently, that Take Back Alberta endorsed. I could think of a whole lot more that signed the Take Back Alberta van. This is the reality. And they are making no bones about the fact that they are getting organized with one thing in mind for the next year and a half. And that is to ensure that their like-minded people are the people who are sitting on our school boards. They are the people who are making decisions about how education gets implemented in the province of Alberta. One of the wonderful things about living in a democracy is that we, in effect, get to have a bloodless coup every few years. And that's a beautiful thing because nobody has to die to change governments. And there are plenty of governments in the world where if you want to change your government, people have to die. We don't have to do that here. But that doesn't mean that there are not extreme elements that want to take over the government, because there absolutely are. And we're seeing that manifest in Take Back Alberta. Now, this is not to be a bit about all hope is lost. That's not what we're trying to do here at all tonight. Because if there's one thing that David Parker's right about, it's that if people get organized, if people show up, they can influence the shape and the decisions that governments make. Now, we're going to have a whole conversation with a longtime friend of the show in just a minute here about the communications decisions that were made around having Mr. Parker on the Real Talk show, because that has been a conversation that has dominated the political sphere over the last little while. And then we're going to open it up to our open mic. But I want to be really, really clear here. There's lots that you can do. This is not an all hope is lost situation. This is an all hands on deck situation. And we said it in other places, but as much as there's people who are condemning Mr. Jesperson for having David Parker on, it should be seen, the things that he said, that clip that we played, should be seen as a rallying cry to anybody who gives a rat's ass about making sure that kids get a quality education that's rooted in facts, not theology, that's rooted in science and evidence-based information, not ideology. It's time to get organized. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. If you don't know who your current school board trustee is, the next move, if you care about this issue at all, that you should be making is finding out who your current school board trustee is and booking a meeting. Because you need to figure out right quick whether or not that's someone that you can continue to support, or maybe you need somebody else to get in there. And if you can't support your current school board trustee, or if they tell you, nah, I'm out, I'm not running again, then that's where you need to start looking for and identifying people who will openly and publicly say, I reject everything that Take Back Alberta is trying to bring to the table. And I'm running because I believe that kids deserve a quality, evidence-based education that is going to see them and this province into the future, not drag us back into the dark ages. And until you find that person, you keep looking. And when you do, you donate to them, you campaign with them, you door knock with them, you share things on social media. There's something that everybody can do to push back against this thing that's coming for our kids. Because as much as David Parker has adopted the rallying cry, leave our kids alone, that's perhaps a rallying cry that we maybe need to start throwing back. Because they're looking to indoctrinate. And it should be terrifying to everybody. Now, all of that being said, there are some very real questions around the decision to have Mr. Parker on a higher profile show like Ryan Jesperson's Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson. There are a lot of people who have voiced a lot of issues on that. It's been a blockety-block kind of week here at The Breakdown because people have been crawling out of the woodwork with all kinds of different opinions on this. There's some people who say, absolutely, David Parker should be allowed on whatever platform he wants to be on. He's not going to come on the show. There are some people who say, absolutely not. David Parker shouldn't be on any shows. Nobody should be giving him any attention. And there's a lot of debates to be had back and forth with that. And to try to make a little bit of sense of that, we're going to bring back longtime friend of the show, Sarah Biggs. Sarah Biggs, how are you doing tonight? I think you got to unmute.
I'm always muted. How are you?
Doing fantastic. How are you doing?
It's good. Busy. Really, really busy.
That was a nice light introduction for you. No.
It's funny when I come back today, because sorry, my dog is barking. Leonard is just being a jerk. I'm not at home right now. We have something happening at the Big's house. Nothing bad. Everything is fine, but I need to keep the dogs out of the house. It's funny that I'm back tonight because today is the anniversary of the press conference when Leila here was hacked.
There we go. So when you say that, we're starting to play a little bit of inside baseball. I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm sure there's some of our listeners who know exactly what you're talking about. But
yeah.
And I should probably throw a little bit of a trigger warning in here because we're about to
trigger
talk
warning
about in vague terms some graphic things that happen.
Yeah.
But if you don't mind, you were Leila Here's campaign manager during her leadership campaign. What are you talking about when you say that her page was hacked?
So that happened. Okay, just to give a little bit of context, I had knee surgery 4 days prior to that. I was on painkillers because I had a big reconstruction, and Sarah was like heads in the cloud. And Leila calls me at 6 o'clock in the morning, and she says, Sarah, they've taken over my Facebook page. They've taken over my personal Facebook. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, what's going on? And in my inducted days of, Chamasat, I look at the page and they uploaded child pornography to her Facebook page. So we decided to do some damage control right away. We hired security. We kind of went on to a little bit of a campaign lockdown. We continued to campaign, but we did a press conference a few days later. Press conference was a year ago today, and I found in my Facebook memories, which is not necessarily pleasant to find, but I remember tweeting a year ago. It said today was a difficult day, but like Leila here said, we will not back down. And we moved on and we continued working, and it was debate break time. And after the press conference, we went on like if nothing was happening. We continued working till the end. So that was the RCMP was involved. Security with legislature, a sergeant at arms. It was a very complicated situation. But today's the first year anniversary of when we said we will not back down. That being said, we experienced the wrath of Take Back Alberta for the past 18 months now, Nate, haven't we?
They have some thoughts.
Do you have the clip with my tweet on Jespo and Parker calling me the perfect example of a climate cult follower?
I don't have that queued up.
It's okay. So that was cute. That was really adorable. So with all the freedom of speech that we have available to us, let's discuss that interview, shall we?
Well, so here's what my first question is. It wasn't exactly breaking news when Ryan Jesperson announced over, I think it was the weekend, that he was going to be having David Parker on Monday, because he had made some comments about Parker previously, and Parker said, "Oh, you should have me on the show." And so it was a little bit telegraphed. There were a lot of people who were like, "Oh God, please don't." But when you heard that the decision had been made, it's been scheduled, David Parker is going to be showing up on Real Talk, what was your first reaction?
Okay, so my first irrational reaction was, what the fuck? Why is he doing this? That was my first reaction. Then you got to go back and being rational and thinking about it. And so there's two sides you could see it. is that either he really wanted, give a chance to David Parker to tell his story and see where he's at. It's good to get an update on his plans to coercive control, but we'll get to that later. But also, what was fascinating is that did he try to give him enough rope to bamboozle himself? I'm not going to say the word because it's trigger warning. And to see if he was going to, say really, really, really bad things, and that showing the real side of David Parker and let the public judge by themselves if David Parker's worthy of, having a look at or not in their organization. So what fascinated me is that as soon as the interview started, so the coldness and the coolness and the calmness of David Parker is kind of slightly terrifying, to be honest. And the ego of this man is just incredible. It's just, anyways. He started right off with pedophilia. My dude, we have bigger problems here. Fort McMurray has 11% unemployment rate. We need teachers. The wait times in the hospitals are so long. You're spewing hate everywhere you walk in the corner of the street, because I strongly believe that it's not that they're scared of the drag queens, they're scared of the sign books that are in the library. That's what I think they're scared about. But, and I really hope that was the intent of Jespo. But when I watched the interview, I was gobsmacked. I was angry. I was upset. I was disgusted. Sorry, Leonard's not being a smart man tonight.
Leonard was disgusted too. That's okay.
He was not happy. Walter was just putting his little paws in front because Walter's still with us. But no, it's interesting the questions he has asked. And, at the end, he tried to give him a little bit more of a hard time. But I would have liked to see Jespo go a little deeper. A little, being a little harder on him. Don't be scared. Just get in there and just dig deep. And really try to get the guy to contradict himself, or try to get him to say something he doesn't want to say, that he doesn't want to show. But we all know that David Parker took the credit for the Renewable Moratorium. That was in the news. Carrie Tate reported it, if I'm not mistaken. And at the end of the day, you need to remember that the premier is in the chair, but there's a lot of actors behind the scenes. And I think I'm going to be getting angry emails from the premier's office tomorrow morning. We'll see if they still have my email address. But, anyways. So what's fascinating is that he let him talk a lot. He did not push back a lot, but he showed a lot of David Parker. But here's what's fascinating is that Jespo listened to Parker when he was saying that women should not be elevating their careers at the detriment of having kids. We're not baby factories, Parker. We're not. We're smart. We're intelligent. We're working hard. We have brains, and we don't have coercive husbands. We're going back. We're not going back to 1955. We're going back to colonial Quebec, and Abitibi, or very, very remote ideas in 1919. When the priests were walking door to door and say, "Hey guys, you only had 5 babies full so far. Are you sure you're filling up your duties? Because Jesus is going to be angry at you if you don't." That's literally what was happening in Quebec. It was coercive control. But we are seeing that, he's saying that climate change is an ideology, it's a religion, needs to be taken out of school, and, sexuality. David, I really don't want to know what a super right-wing religious person has to say about sex ed. I really don't, because I think I gotta know what kind of education he's received. And pretty much it's like, the bees and the flowers. How do you call it? The birds and the bees.
The birds and the bees.
Thank you, because I'm gonna have to explain that to Maddie soon, because she's gonna be 3 soon. But the gal that he had to speak with a straight face about all of those horrible things that he was, and also he needs to review his definitions of a little bit about fascism, communism. I think he could use a book in the library called a dictionary. It's about this thick usually. Merriam-Webster makes a good one. But you and I, Nate, talked about it a lot post leadership campaign. We need to organize. I've been extremely quiet during the leadership campaign during the last election campaign for multiple reasons. I was doing stuff in the background, but we need to get organized. Door knocking for, a school board trustee starts about 2-3 months before the election.
Needs to start now.
It needs to start, I would say, in the next 6 months, minimum. Because those guys, what they have over us is the organization and the fear. They are instilling a fear of God into their members and saying, if we don't do this, we are not good people. Calling us anti-human is full of garbage. Calling us, deciding not to have children is not anti-human. You might have endometriosis, you might have had ovarian cancer, testicular cancer, went through chemotherapy. Doesn't make you anti-human. You just are not physically able to produce an embryo.
I don't think that's I think that's Parker's beef, though. I mean, like he gives. I'm not going to drop any names because I don't think that's appropriate. But he gives certain people a very clear, and in that interview, he gave certain people a pass because they are not able to have kids. I think what his beef is if in his perception you've chosen not to have kids for whatever reason, then you're this anti-human thing. But I want to bring you back to the Jespo piece. I don't want to spend too much time on Parker's bullshit because it's bullshit.
That's fine.
But one of the questions, and somebody in the comments, which you're not allowed to read, somebody in the comments threw this up, and I think that they made the very good argument. I think a lot of people, and you even said it, you wanted Jespo to go after Parker. And I think the problem and the frustration that a lot of people experienced is that's not really Jespo's jam. It never has been. I mean, he's very good, and I think part of his strategy, his approach, is he has a very bombastic style. I could break into my Jespo impression right now, but you gave me grief last time.
Please don't.
I've been practicing my trash talk introduction just for this episode, but
you can do it if you want.
Okay, maybe later. Maybe before I introduce the last clip. But his approach when he's dealing with polarizing figures is he'll have the conversation with them, and it seems like he views his role, and I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, but it seems like he views his role as, I'm going to amplify this. I'm going to put this out into the ether so that more people are aware of it. I'm not going to take a position necessarily unless it gets really far out there. And he did take a position a couple of times there. But I'm not going to take a position unless it gets really, really far out there, because I want people to take those positions themselves. I want people to do the heavy lifting so I can continue to get all of the guests and not get, blackballed by the NDP or something, because I hear that happens. But I think that's sort of his strategy. Do you think I'm reading that wrong? Because I just don't know if it's hard to ask, somebody who has made their career both while in radio and after radio to be that street fighter when that's never been their jam. Like the only time that the Jespo ostensibly takes the gloves off that I've seen is during the I'm trying so hard not to do it right now, during the trash talk segments, when he's responding to an email or when he's responding to somebody who's not in the room and somebody who maybe doesn't have that much profile. But when you stick, like, how many times has he had Danielle Smith on and let her skate with unmitigated bullshit?
Softballed over and over. So if I would have been Jespo, what I would have done is that I would have brought Charles Adler into that conversation. Charles would have brought an edge to it and really hold Parker accountable, because we all know, like, Charles, I talked to him about that in the past, and we've talked, and even this weekend I did address my concerns to Charles. I was like, I'm concerned. Leonard, I have concerns.
Leonard also has concerns. See, he agrees.
He's always concerned. Neighborhood safety, man. He's protecting his land. But I think that he should have had another person with him to bring some sort of edge and make the exchange a little bit heated, because yes, Jespo did push back a few times, but I think that the questions did not go deep enough. And, okay, so you're saying that, sex ed, LGBTQ flags, sidewalks, climate change, all that is part of a religion, and they want to take the religion out, but they want to push their Christian values into the system. So where does that bring us? What do you want to do to the education system, Parker? What do you want to do to it? Because I think that there's a little bit of misunderstanding about the role of school boards as well. It's because there's a curriculum as well that they need to respect, and they just can't do a blockade and
Well, but here's the thing.
protesting it.
This is another one of the questions. I'm going to jump in because you just gave me the opening that I wanted.
Yes.
Right now, if Danielle Smith, we just had a whole conversation with Dr. Carla Peck about the curriculum and how there's certain parts of the curriculum nobody knows what's going on. It is radio silence. There are no identified working groups. The social studies curriculum is a great big mystery, and that was one of the biggest training.
And I can confirm that, nothing's happening.
Yeah. So one of the questions that has to bubble up in some people's minds is that being left alone for now? Because there are school board trustees who campaigned against the UCP when they ran as school board trustees, who campaigned against a socially conservative, hard right viewpoint. They were very, very clear about endorsing evidence-based education, that sort of thing. If Danielle Smith and the UCP, and let's remember who the new Minister of Education is as well, Mr. I love those white supremacist MLAs from history. Let's put them on video because he did. That's not me being Nicolaides absolutely did that. But if Nicolaides rolls out,
but it was an error. It was an error.
If you're going to be a history buff, I don't know, maybe be a history buff. But if Nicolaides was to roll out a hard socially conservative curriculum right now, there are people on those school boards who would say, "Nuh-uh, not cool. We're going to stamp our feet and do things." Whereas if Take Back Alberta gets in a bunch of candidates that are of the similar mind, then a more socially conservative platform, a more socially conservative curriculum could be introduced with minimal resistance. And that's where I think this isn't like the thing with David Parker that I keep going back to is he says what he's going to do, but then he's also doing other things too. And I think he's just smart enough. Like he's a nightmare for democracy and for society, as far as I'm concerned. That's just my statement of fact that I in any way could be held liable for. But
whatever. I have insurance.
But the at the end of the day, he is clearly, by the fact he is where he is, an incredibly effective political operative.
I would love to attend a Take Back Alberta event, but I don't think I could go in even if I would, cover my head, wear glasses. They would recognize me right away. If someone is like, I would say go. Register to those events and go and listen to what they have to say. After that, we need, honestly, in Calgary, like my trustee is Nancy Close. She is amazing. She's done an amazing job. She's been working really hard. Shout out to her. She led a good campaign. But has anyone really been invested into a school trustee campaign? No. It's always, the secondary thought of who am I going to vote for? I need to vote for. They're like, oh, right, I forgot, school trustee too. We need to organize. Teachers, I know teachers are tired. I totally get it. But teachers will have to organize. At the end of the day, we need to protect the education of our kids. The education that we are seeing right now. Well, I'm not talking about the social curriculum, by the way, but everything is science-based, and we need to keep it that way. We need to keep it objective. When you start bringing big feelings of Christianism and ideology and coercive control and telling the little girls, you know what, you need to be a good lady to your men later. So here we're going to have, like, when I was in high school, I had sewing classes and cooking classes. Like, that was fucking garbage. But we do not need to go back into 1960, 1965 curriculum because there's one dude that got his feelings hurt somewhere and he decided to throw the province on fire. That's what we need to be mindful of. So everybody's tired. Heck, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Like, the past 2 weeks have been hell with that renewable garbage stuff. But at the end of the day, we need to organize. We really do, because we're going to have to be careful to not elect, like, kind of, what's that, the Chandler slate? Get people out of there. We're going to have to make sure.
I'm not going anywhere. I don't even think I'm legally allowed.
I'm not saying anything bad. It's a freedom of speech. It's an opinion. I'm just saying, there are some actors out there that, don't see progress like we see it. I'll keep it at that. Then, next thing, we're going to have to pay attention to school boards, to library boards. And then we also need to pay attention to the different boards that will be nominated within the city infrastructure. So let's say the Calgary Police Board, the bigger library board, the sports board, like everything, like leisure centers and everything. Like, I am worried that they are going to go for way deeper than what they pretend that they will be going.
I'm sure they will. That's
100%.
With Parker is that I think he understands enough about tactics is that you let people know where part of you is going to be, but so
they can focus on that, but you need to, show up on the other side as well. So we're going to have to be like tiny little ants working really, really hard in the background, talking to your families, talk to your family, talk to your mother-in-law. My mother-in-law is fantastic. Talk to people, listen to people, and make them understand that, at the end of the day, there's Catholic school. They can send their kids to Catholic school if they want a religious upbringing. Do not touch the public school system and leave it alone. Because Sarah's gonna get angry. And by the way, I'm on parents' council. So if I see one of those, individuals showing up and trying to do things that are not kosher, well, they're going to be finding me in the way.
I want to highlight a point that came up in the chat here real quick because I think it's really important.
Because I'm not looking at the chat.
You're not? No, that's what I'm doing here.
No.
Something to remember too, many rural areas don't get many people running for school trustee. If you show up, you are usually elected by acclamation. So find somebody to run. And another thing that's important to realize is, like, even in a major municipality like Calgary, it's not a full-time job. Like school board trustees don't get paid a full-time job salaries. Most school board
I think in Calgary it's around $48,000, maybe $50,000 a year in Calgary.
I know that I've spoken to my school board trustee and my previous school board trustee, and it is not enough to pay the bills. Which is not to say don't do it. It is to say the requirements of the role aren't entirely consuming. I mean, you can do it off.
They're not.
You can kind of do it off the edge of your desk, especially
especially of small town.
This is what I'm saying.
Rural Alberta. We are so. There is a term that we like to use in political sciences and social sciences that is called a anomie, A-N-O-M-I-E. I would look it up if I was every one of you tonight. It is a characterization of a wind of change for social disorder. We are at a very, very pivotal moment in our political lives, in the province that, some actors are trying to take us to, that we cannot, he's saying, well, we've been complacent for long enough. Well, so have we.
Yes.
It's one thing to yell on the internet. It's one thing to yell at the clouds. But what have we been saying, Nate, for 2 years? Get involved. It's all you can do. Everybody's tired. So, anomie, A-N-O-M-I-E. Sorry, I looked at the chat. So I would, consider, having a loan. But at the end of the day, God damn it, like, we need to keep ideology. Like, I'm not for coercive control. I am not for being told that I need to slow down on my career to have more kids. I had my kid that was 37 and a half. And you know what? The factory's closed. I'm not having any more. I'm done because one is more than enough. But, they want their freedom of speech. They want their freedom of action. They want all of that beautiful freedom. But as soon as you speak against them, your life is going to turn into a living hell, because that's who they are. They want everybody to agree with them. They will agree with everybody that is like, that veneers them. It's just like, yes, you're so right. You're so right. Let's do this. Let's get it right. But as soon as you are a woman, that you have an opinion, a quarter of a brain, and say, hey, this is wrong, they come after you. And that's what they like to do. They like to belittle people. It's like sex marxists. People get involved. I do not know how much I need to say, get involved. Get involved, please. School council is fun. School board is a few hours a week, in the best case. Sometimes it's full-time for a few weeks. Get involved, because we are going to be deciding in the next few years which direction the province is going to take. And it's either we're trying to help ourselves and keep it as it was, as even if it was not perfect, or we will be dealing with coercive control from those guys. Because let's not forget that the UCP election, the board's coming up November.
Oh boy, is it. And that's one that
board.
He went after the president because he felt that the price was prohibitive and it wasn't going to be able to get his members in there. So I'm waiting to see. Here's my thing. I'm waiting to see.
I heard a few rumors about that.
I wonder if, are we going to see David Parker president of the UCP?
I think he's going to do something else.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. But
and you know where I'm going.
Yep. Oh yeah.
But I don't want to. It could be. I don't think that's what he wants. But if things are not going his way, or if some actors are not being compliant enough to his requests, his demands, I'm worried that things could go way further and things could get way worse. Like I was talking to someone this week, I was like, we need We need to take them more seriously than what we have been for the past 2 years. Like, they have been in my way since the leadership, so May 2022, when it started, when we started to announce and everything in between. That's when they started to get in my way. But at the end of the day, if we don't do anything, we're going to be the poor suckers that are going to be suffering from it. Everybody's tired. I know a lot of people, like we're seeing with the moratorium, like full disclosure, I have a client that, was considering Alberta, but bye-bye because of those policies. And it's hurting everything. It's hurting the economy. Like Roger from Grand Prairie, how is he going to explain to his kids that he can't buy Christmas gifts or Christmas dinner because his electricity bill is $775 and daddy's out of work?
We got tagged
of some decisions.
We got tagged in a tweet tonight where somebody was comparing their power bill from this year to last year for the exact same place that they live. I don't want to say too much. And it was literally double. I mean, and here's the thing. You gave me my window, so we're gonna play a quick little clip, and then we're gonna open it up to the open mic because we've had people waiting for a little bit. If you're able to stick around.
Yeah, sorry guys. Yeah.
Perfect. I want to give. God, I would love to meet. I mean, I never will. I know that, and it makes my heart sad. But I would love to meet and take for coffee the person who's behind the Twitter account Disordered YYC, because I do not know where they get the time, but they find all of they're able to go through the volume of media that's produced. And this clip that I'm going to play right here, when it comes to the electricity piece, is so important. We had David Gray on the show a little while ago, and he explained all of this in great detail. And it's something that has been poorly understood. And I know that David Gray has been trying to raise the alarm on it for quite a while. I could not believe when Disordered put this clip up of Danielle Smith acknowledging not only is the problem with electricity prices not because of inflation, it's not because of power generation, it's because there's certain corporations that are fixing the game, but also that it happened on the UCP's watch.
The Premier, why Alberta's electricity rates have increased 128% in 1 year compared to 12% in Saskatchewan. Alberta also has the highest price per 75 kilowatt hours. Why is this? We deserve to know the truth, and that is from Kevin.
We certainly do, and that's why I've got my electricity minister and Nathan Neudorf working on that. One of the things that changed a few years ago is this concept of economic withholding. It's a complicated topic to raise, but essentially it allows for generators to hold back a little bit of the power so that the price goes up so that they can sell it at a price that allows them to make money. And when we looked at this before, we never used to allow this. When they looked at it in 2020, the market surveillance administrator didn't think that there was a problem. And so they said, well, this is a legitimate practice. And now what we have seen is, unfortunately, I think too much power is being held back. Prices are escalating too much, and we're all paying the price for it. So we've begun the conversation of how we address that, because we have a problem with the market design. There's no question about it. When the regulated rate option surges to 32 cents a kilowatt hour, that's a sign that something's broken.
There it is. I mean, that's the quiet part out loud right there. Danielle Smith making no bones about it. It was a policy change that was made by the UCP that opened the door for power companies to play games with supply and demand. That's what's driven the prices up, period, end of sentence.
But Nate, I'm wondering what happened. What must have happened this summer for, the government to have a change of heart within less than 2 weeks? I'm really wondering what happened, especially, when the timestamps of the goddamn letters are showing July 20th. Anyways, let's move on. I'm just going to go get water because I'm really thirsty, but I'm listening.
Yeah,
I'll send Leonard over to moderate. Okay.
Sounds good. I'm going to open it up to the open mic while you do that, because we do have one person who has been waiting for an unbelievably long time. I'm telegraphing, by the way. I'm going to vamp for a second about opening up the open mic and Cassandra being our first speaker, because I'm so scared, based on how long she's been waiting to speak, that she's fallen asleep. And I'm gonna add her as a speaker, and there's gonna be absolutely no one there, because we are now well into hour 2, and that's a long time to ask somebody to hang out to share the thoughts. But I hear some noise. So Cassandra, you there?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm laughing because I was just I did it because I thought you were going to open up, and then when I realized Sarah was coming on, I thought, well, they might make it to me, they might not. I'll just I'm hanging out anyway.
The open mic is one of my favorite parts of the shows, because not only are there regular speakers like yourself who bring some really good insight, but occasionally we get Spider-Man and the Joker, so that's cool too.
Yeah.
What's going on tonight?
Oh God, where do I? This. I mean, it's always loaded. There's always something. But I actually, I decided I wanted to speak on one topic, and then you kept going, and I'm like, oh Lord, where do I start? But I do want, back to the whole electricity thing. One of the things that when I was listening to Danielle talk, that drove me absolutely nuts, because she was trying to answer this question to the board from a reporter, and she's trying to think things that you can see her. You can almost see the wheels turning in her head while she's trying to think of how to respond. And she's like, well, and it gets -30, and then the wind stops blowing and the sun stops shining, because it gets to 30 below. And I'm like, okay, literally. And I had an idea, but I had to go look up to confirm. So 333 days out of 356 days a year in Alberta are sunny. We are literally the sunniest province in Canada. Calgary and Edmonton being the sunniest cities in the country. And we are the second windiest place in the world. And then, because I'm tweeting this out on my other account, and they're like, there's always some jackass that's like, oh, well, the sun doesn't shine at night. And I'm like, really? The sun doesn't shine at night? Well, okay, I think you need to read up on how all this works. There are places where the sun does shine for part of the year at night.
Yeah, it's going
but that's another. But yeah, so I just thought it was ridiculous. And then somebody else threw, and they were trying to be serious about, but the turbines start working when it gets to -10 or 20, and I'm like, and I know that early on that was an issue, but it just so happens that some of the windiest places on the planet and some of the windiest times of year are the coldest. So I guess, we've got all these great people at developing technology. I guess somebody did come up with some turbines that actually work to -40. So, I just I don't, this is what drives me nuts. She just spews stuff. And the other thing that is troubling me is in some cases about the oil and gas and I go, okay, I can see where you might be gaining something from this, but in the case of this whole renewable energy, I fail to see how they're benefiting in any way from this. I understand, when they're trying to promote oil and gas and trying to fight against Ottawa and make Ottawa the enemy against our oil and gas, and how that might benefit them. I just cannot see any financial, political, or any other benefit to what they're doing on the energy, and how misinformed,
I can speculate on two. And I ran one of these by Sarah earlier today because it was bugging me. And I was just like, I don't know if you've heard anything, but I just got a gut feeling. So the first one is, and I said this as soon as they announced the moratorium, If you want to say to the feds, we can't make 2035, can't be done, takes too much. A really great way to accomplish that is by not doing anything renewable for 6 months and then bringing in a whole bunch of new policy framework that everybody's going to have to adapt to. If you find administrative ways to slow the brake or to pump the brakes on getting to renewables and getting to a net zero by 2035, then you found ways to get to net zero by not get to net zero by 2035.
And I can see that argument, but the only problem I have with that argument is under the UCP. Is under the UCP, as early as 2021, they were already saying, like, with our advancements in solar and geothermal and all of this, that we were actually on course to meet the 2050 targets by 2035 and methane by 2025. So
I think that Smith needs the federal boogeyman, though. I think that's a big part of her strategy is the more thing, like everything that she does comes back to, and it's the Fed's fault. It doesn't matter. It could rain during a press conference and she'd be Justin Trudeau. That's her jam.
I get that that's her jam, but my problem with it is that if you're going to have that jam, at least when you're making an argument, like have some, I don't know, like have some intelligence and know what you're talking about so that you can actually maybe make a argument that's not so easily torn apart. You know what I mean? Like it's just too easily torn apart, and I think that's my biggest issue.
I don't disagree, but I go back to Turkish time and all. The other reason that I can see potentially for something like this is we've heard Smith talk more and more and more about how we need more baseload capacity. We've heard Smith talk more and more about how she's not really talking about Alberta is going to be an oil province. She's moved away from that, and in a fascinating tell, even Canada Action has moved away from that narrative. Everybody's now talking about natural gas. And so I find the question that I asked Sarah today, and I'm going to ask her to answer it again now so everybody else can hear it, was is this buying time to get some natural gas, some new natural gas projects in the mix? Does this say, hey, you know what? We don't have the framework for doing renewables right now, but natural gas is pretty much net zero anyways. So we're gonna go all in. We've got this company out of Turkey, and they make these portable natural gas plants that they've sworn will be here next month. I mean, Sarah.
I do believe that it will be in the agenda because, like we said this afternoon, when Smith talks about very specific projects, she sends telegrams and little pigeons right, left, and center, and sends a lot of clue because subtlety is not necessarily something that is, given to everyone. I would not be surprised to see not hydrogen. Sorry, I've been talking a lot about hydrogen for the past 6 months. I would not be surprised to see natural gas, power generation hopping by a land close by your house. It's got to be, we all know we need to expand the grid. We need to expand the grid. Yes, we need to expand the grid to, to respond to the demand of electric vehicles, to more electrification, a lot of things that we're using now are more, battery generated and everything in between. We need to expand the grid. But this ain't the way. And the false equivalencies of, but we need regulations for renewables when they cannot even enforce $750 million in taxes that are owed by the oil and gas industries to be paid to the landowners with the Landowners' Right Commission. That's not our story. There's a lot of false
There's a lot of bullshit.
You,
I mean, at the end of the day,
I'm trying to be polite, but there's a lot of false equivalencies here that we're dealing with. That's not there are apples and oranges and cucumbers and then tomatoes. We can't even compare them. Like we can't.
No, you're right.
Danielle Smith's government. Danielle Smith's government. We're not talking about Jason Kenney's government. We're talking about Danielle Smith's government. We're talking about Danielle Smith's minister responded to the rural municipalities of Alberta and said, all of the framework that we need is already in place. And now she's claiming, oh, no, there's nothing. It's the Wild West. We've got, there's these cowboys and they're rustling the solar panels. It's chaos.
But you know what? If a farmer wants to subsidize some of their revenues during the winter on solar energy or wind energy on their own land, it's their land. Let them be. Let them make the decision.
There's agricultural solar. There's solar panels that are designed to work in agricultural settings without interrupting the agriculture. So it's just bullshit.
You know, my vagina, my problem. My agricultural land, their problem. Like, they make their own decisions. Like, why do we interfere? We are the province of personal responsibilities and freedom. Why can we not let farmers make their own decisions on how do we make their farm sustainable for the future? Good God. Thank you.
Anything else you want to add, Cassandra?
Sorry.
Yes, I'm just like, I swear, I feel like everything that, like, Sarah, it's like she's in my head because I've been screaming the same things that she just went on a rant about. I'm just like, yes.
I'm going to get so many angry emails.
But I guess the other thing is, you know, I wish we need to talk more about housing. I know this hasn't come in, but I'm just going to say I was just at a town hall where I met, it was women and gender diverse people that have experienced homelessness or just housing precarity. And there was frontline service providers, including people from Calgary Housing and other nonprofits. And we were all there meeting with the federal and a lot of advocates. And we were meeting with the federal housing advocate.
Good.
And the stories I heard in that room, like I am going through my own housing precarity. I've been living in the same place for 7 years and now I have to move. And I've known for a few months and I've been trying to find a place and I'm now a month away and I'm terrified. And, you know, there's nothing. And they've invited all these people here. You know, I've told people in BC and Ontario that I know that are thinking of coming. I'm like, don't do it. There's already not enough housing and it's gotten worse. And it's not even about just affordable. Like even it's hard, even when you stretch your budget to the limit and say, okay, well, I can live on this much less. You still can't get that place because you're going and there's like people will put up places for rent and they get so many they shut their ads down after a day because they've gotten such an overwhelming response. And so it's just really terrible. And I hope that you will do a show about that. And if you want to reach out and talk to me more, I can give you some more.
You're the second person that's requested that literally today. And I can tell you that it is a big part of the conversation that I had with Guy Felicella. Obviously, it reaches much, much farther than people who are experiencing mental health or addictions issues.
Exactly.
This is it's complicated, but it's worked its way to the top of my list of topics that we're going to be covering right away because literally myself and the team here are getting inundated all week with requests for, are you going to talk about housing? Are you going to talk about the rental situation? Are you going to talk about housing? Are you going to talk about the rental situation? So one of my goals over the next couple of days is to make some connections. So if you want to send me a DM or send the show a DM in regards to who are some people that you would recommend that we get on board, absolutely.
Yeah, well, just so you know, I am a housing, like, I mean, I always talk about my disability advocate. I'm also a housing advocate. And I actually am one of the admins on a friend that started a Facebook group it's Alberta Landlord and Tenants Complaint Group, but it's really an advice group. So landlords and tenants go on there and they ask advice they tell their stories about, I'm in this situation, what are my rights? And landlords and tenants actually help each other as well, like give each other advice about if they've got a bad landlord or a landlord's got a bad tenant, then people come in and give them advice, point them to the RTDRS or other regulatory bodies that could help them. And so we do a lot of that. And I've been working with a lot of people on housing, but I can definitely give you some names. There's one name right off the top of my head that, a really strong housing advocate, and I've been trying to get her on another podcast. Some friends of mine have, but I've heard her speak, and she's talked to me, and she just knows her stuff and her statistics and in such a way that I can't even compete with it. And she's a housing is a human rights advocate, and cool. Very strong, very smart.
Yeah, send me a DM, and we will set that up. We got Lynn in the queue as well, and then I just got another DM that I want to address after we give Lynn the opportunity to speak, because it is painfully on topic with a lot of what we've been talking about tonight. So I'm going to add Lynn in here, and then Sarah, I'm going to play the ad roll tonight, because I'm going to give you something to be angry about. Lynn, what's going on tonight?
Sorry, Nate. I came in late, so I didn't hear any of the stuff that Cassandra was talking about, because I was a bad Albertan and listening to the American politics.
Oh my God, that was a shit show and a half. Sorry.
I don't even know what y'all are talking about.
I know, the debate. But anyway, I was listening to you. I came in listening about the school boards. And I have on, this is not a Christian thing. I had more than one person who attended the Fort McMurray Christian or the Catholic school board, the thing that they had going on. And as a 66-year-old, I'm like, you know what? I have time for this. I think I might just run for this, because I have a weird last name. And I need to do something against David Parker.
There you go.
So if you guys don't think that this guy is serious on infiltrating our system, yeah, because at the Catholic school board, they didn't even, follow the rules. They had their Christian people. Again, I'm a Christian, but their group who didn't follow the rules, broke all of the rules, and cheered for the one person or maybe two who were, for the, I don't even know how to say this. The guy that was, Nate, you saw the poster and everything he had on there. And I'm just saying, all I'm going to say is we need to stand up and run. It's not a big deal. It's not a lot of time out of our day. And we need to stand up and against these people. And that's all I'm going to say.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much, Lynn. We've been talking about Take Back Alberta. We've been talking about their refusal to give up on the things. We've been talking about how they're pursuing a repressive agenda in the name of freedoms. From the Breakdowns DMs not 5 minutes ago, this is a poster that appeared in Westlock. Neutrality and equality. We're collecting signatures to petition the town of Westlock to create a neutrality bylaw. Ensuring crosswalks, flags on public property remain neutral. The petition, if successful, will force a townwide vote on the bylaw that will allow all citizens to have their say democratically, whether for or against the bylaw. We believe the government should stay neutral and not elevate any one special interest group over another. Make no mistake.
Fuck
This
off.
is
White fragility.
Well, here's the two things, and I'm going to
sorry.
throw these two facts out there. So, thing number one, this is very clearly about the Pride crosswalk that took place in Westlock. And who's the TBA organizer? I'm not saying it's related.
It starts with a E. It starts in Anita.
Well, it's Benita.
Yeah.
Benita Peterson.
Well, that's
from
what I was
Westlock.
saying. It starts with a B,
Yeah,
ends with Anita.
I have her phone number.
No, I'm good. Seriously, I'm dealing with enough crazies this day. But you know what? Those same people, I bet you, they want neutrality everywhere except in the bathrooms.
Mic drop. All right. Lynn, any other thoughts you wanted to add to the? I mean, I totally.
Sorry if I.
And I can't say this enough as somebody who has run into elections. I have happily come to terms with the fact that this is my niche. This is where I best do my civic duty. But I got nothing but respect. And I said this to Alberta Party Leader Barry Morishita just like 2 weeks ago. I have nothing but respect for anybody who chooses to run in an election, regardless of what the outcome. It is, it's. We, as Sarah's been saying, as I've been saying, and as everybody else who's been saying, who's spoken tonight, we all need to get more involved. We all need to do more. And if you're somebody who has the bandwidth to run for something like that, nothing but respect for
And
me.
you know what? It's Calgary Pride this weekend. Some political parties will be allowed to march into the Pride. Go, wear a rainbow t-shirt, and support the community. There's nothing more that's making them upset than seeing rational people by the numbers. If you can, go and march this weekend, please. Please, please.
I agree with Sarah. As a Christian, again, a Christian, we need to stand up for the rights of everyone.
Well, at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, what would Jesus do?
Exactly.
You know? And I don't think they're asking that question enough.
And not that I want to run for school board, but you know what? Yeah, I might just do it.
I think you should.
Oh, good night. Do it.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Sarah, I'm going to give you the last. I mean, we're coming up to 2.5 hours here again.
We're really good at extending everything.
Right?
It's like the old days.
Any other thoughts you want to throw out there before I do the wrap up and run the clip that I've been waiting all night to run?
Get involved, and my apologies to people if I've been like super quiet for the past few months. It's been my mental health had to come first, and then my family, because I've been away a lot and I was in London a lot because of work, so that was super cool. And hopefully I'll be back soon.
There we go.
I'm inviting myself.
I noticed that.
Wrap it up.
All right. There we go. Okay, Sarah, thanks so much for coming in and weighing in. I hope that Mr. Jesperson doesn't send us angry emails. I just don't think that it's fair to hold to him, like to try to ask somebody to be something that they're not. And Ryan Jesperson has never been the guy to go knuckle to knuckle, blow to blow with a guest who's problematic. And I totally understand why. But that's one of the reasons why we don't bother with any kind of advertising with our show. And that's one of the reasons why we use puppets when guests refuse to come on the show, because it's way more fun. And we don't take ourselves anywhere near as seriously as many other broadcasts do. But we do rely on the support of our Patreon sponsors for being able to pay the bills and keep the lights on around here. So if you have, we spent a bunch of the show talking about how a lot of people are at the end of the rope. Totally get that. If you don't have the financial means, you don't have the financial means. There's no pressure here. Just like and share some things. Subscribe, as the kids say. Smash that subscribe button. But if you do have $5 a month kicking around, we would love nothing more than if you signed up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee or a muffin or a large cookie, a small blizzard, they're overpriced. You can help us to continue to produce the kind of content that we do here. We talked about before our little break, we were going to be looking into some merch. We're further down the road on that, and we're hopefully going to have some merch announcements in the next couple of weeks here. So stay tuned for that, because that's another way that you can support us and probably piss some people off. That's cool, though. But as promised, and I had to do some. There's some uploading and some deleting of some videos, because we have a limit of how many videos we can store into the server thing here. But as promised, I wanted to end the show with by playing one more little clip here, because it's my favorite clip ever, and then we'll do the little wrap up.
BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
I love that clip so much. It's the second nod. It's the second nod that does it for me. That's what just gets me right there. For everybody who's listening to the audio version, maybe we'll post the video later tonight, just as a fun thing for everybody to see. But that's my favorite video of Alberta politics ever. That's better for me. That's better than the cookie video, and that's going back a little bit. I want to say a big thank you, as always, to all of our Patreon supporters. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who follows the show on any of, God, there's getting to be so many social media platforms now, but big thank you to everybody who's following us on any of the social media platforms, sharing the stuff, all that kind of thing. It is a huge help. It helps us get the word out. So thank you so much to everybody there. I want to say a big thank you to Sarah Biggs for coming on the show tonight and sharing some thoughts. Big thank you to our regular speakers who popped in as well to share some thoughts, and everybody who's listening to or watching the show. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to hang out and listen to or watch the show. If you're on the YouTubes, leave a comment. We read the comments. If you're listening to this on the podcast, then we'd love nothing more if you left us a rating and maybe a little review. Talk about what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, how much you hate me, whatever. It's all good. But the more reviews and the more ratings that we get in there, the more ears the podcast gets into. All of that being said, it was a heavy episode. We're 2.5 hours in. Civic engagement is work, everybody. We get that. Take breaks. Lord knows I just had one. But as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.